Some people take all difficulties and blows of fate in stride and can even laugh at themselves, but that's not true for everyone. There are some people you shouldn't make fun of because it can be life-threatening. This was also the case in today's story. Todd Kohlhepp was born on March 7, 1971 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA. When the boy was only 2 years old, his parents decided to divorce. He was unable to develop a close relationship with his father and mother, but he stayed with her. Todd took his stepfather's surname, McComb, when his mother remarried, but he also had a very difficult relationship with him. Todd always had major social problems and was unable to communicate well with his peers and other people. He saw everyone he met as a potential rival. Even in kindergarten, he was constantly arguing with other children, often getting into fights and destroying other people's property. Todd behaved aggressively in every situation, as if unable to control his emotions, including his anger. He wasn't particularly friendly at home either. At a young age, Todd began treating animals cruelly. He killed a goldfish with bleach and shot a dog with an air rifle. Sadistic behavior and Todd were inextricably linked. These terrible tendencies accompanied him throughout his life. While he was still in early school, his mother moved to South Carolina with her stepfather. The woman once again decided to separate from her new husband, which happened in 1982. The very next year, she met and married a new man. Todd was 12 at the time. Despite his young age, he was the cause of conflict in the house almost daily. The boy was so uncontrollable and aggressive that his mother and stepfather feared for their lives and had him committed to a psychiatric hospital. However, this did little to help. They hoped that a move to South Carolina would soften his character and lead to positive changes, but that didn't happen either. Todd soon announced that he didn't like it there and wanted to move in with his biological father. Since the divorce, they hadn't seen each other for 8 years. The man lived in Arizona. The son probably thought that this would allow him to start a new life and gain a new perspective on life. After the move to Tempe, Arizona, it quickly became clear that the boy's behavior would not improve. His biological father described his son as someone who could only feel hate. There he was also admitted to psychiatric care several times. Despite all efforts, the situation only worsened. In November 1986, the troubled teenager Todd committed his first serious crime. At the time, the boy was only 15 years old. One Saturday, he simply walked down the street where he met his 14-year-old neighbor, Christy Granada. The student deceived her, kidnapped her, took her to his father's house, taped her mouth shut, tied her up, held a gun to her head, and raped her. This attack was unprovoked. He had had little contact with his victim beforehand. They only greeted each other when they happened to meet. After the attack, Todd threatened to kill her if she told anyone. He convinced her that he would shoot her brothers, sisters, and entire family. The underage kidnapper intimidated her so much that the victim actually wanted to remain silent. His cruel and manipulative personality had already developed. Todd was so convinced of his own importance and superiority that he believed he could let any atrocity go unpunished. The kidnapping victim was actually willing to remain silent. The student had no idea that her relatives were already worried and actively searching for her. Shortly before the attack, her parents had taught their children how to behave in an emergency situation. The missing girl's younger brother became anxious when he couldn't find her at home and called the police. Fortunately, Todd eventually released his victim. She returned home just as her brother was speaking to the police. The girl was forced to explain where she had been and what had happened to her. The 15-year-old offender was arrested. From the beginning, Todd showed no concern for the victim. He was only concerned about how long he would spend in prison. His lawyer claimed that his client would not harm anyone in the future. Todd had simply made a mistake. At the age of 15, he was sent to prison for his first extended period. There, the teenager changed his behavior fundamentally. His brutal nature was almost invisible. He was a model inmate, but in reality, he only skillfully concealed his inner struggle and innate cruelty. On November 24, 2001, the offender was released from prison. He was now 30 years old. He spent half of that time behind bars, but he didn't waste any time there. Todd completed a degree in computer technology. After his release from prison, he decided to return to South Carolina, wanting to be with his mother after his release. Now she could no longer oppose him. Behind bars, Todd seemed to have embarked on a path to recovery and decided to integrate into society. To do this, he needed to find a suitable job. Todd didn't get along well with other people. He would have found it difficult to work in a team, so he decided to become self-employed. After changing jobs several times, mainly as a designer, his desire only grew stronger. 5 years after his release, in 2006, he applied for a license to sell real estate in South Carolina. At the time, he was 35 years old. In response to his application, he was told that he could not be granted a license because he was on the sex offender registry. It seemed as if the man had no chance of starting his own business, but that was not the case. Todd learned to hide his brutal nature very well and became cunning and calculating. The man arranged a personal appointment to explain his situation. Todd recounted the incident in detail, downplaying the brutality. He attributed it all to a simple misunderstanding with his girlfriend and his age, explaining that it had all happened consensually, but that his girlfriend had simply been offended and wanted to teach him a lesson, which was why he was sent to prison. His plan worked. With this lie, he was able to convince the licensing authority that it was a simple misunderstanding and that he wanted a second chance. In June 2006, Todd Kohlhepp received his license as a real estate agent. The convicted criminal founded his own business and continued to live the life of a respected, exemplary citizen who had simply been defrauded in his youth. His business flourished and brought in good income. The man became wealthy and successful. Interestingly, at the same time, he became an avid gun collector. He owned numerous pistols and rifles. According to Todd, he inherited this passion from his father, who also collected such things. This interest fit well with Todd's other hobbies. He loved everything related to power and strength. He even got a pilot's license. The man was enthusiastic about motorcycles and fast cars. Outwardly, he looked like a successful man with a very charismatic and strong personality. Todd wasn't the only successful person in town. In November 2003, 30-year-old Scott Ponder opened a motorcycle shop. He was helped by his 52-year-old mother, Beverly Guy, who worked alongside him. He also had a passion for this form of transportation. This business was a dream come true for him. He ran a thriving business. Todd often stopped by to admire the motorcycles and eventually bought one for himself. Scott's fiancée, Melissa, moved in with him in 2002. They married in January. In November 2003, his wife learned she was pregnant. Their first child was due. They seemed to be a happy couple, having the time of their lives. The Ponders had no idea how radically everything would change in just a few days. On November 6, 2003, Scott and his wife drove to their motorcycle shop as usual. His wife dropped him off in the parking lot. As she drove past, their eyes met and Scott blew her a kiss. She drove to the medical center for her first ultrasound appointment. It was such an important and exciting event for her, but Scott couldn't accompany her, even though he hoped to see and hear his baby's heartbeat. Unfortunately, the businessman was very busy at the dealership and couldn't just leave his work. Melissa waited for her husband to return to tell him how everything had gone and what the doctor had said. Instead, at 3 p.m., the woman received a call from a concerned shop employee reporting a shooting at the motorcycle shop. Melissa was on the other side of town but dropped everything and headed there. The scene was very noisy. About 10 police cars had gathered. The street was blocked off and she wasn't allowed through, even though the woman said her husband, Scott, must be there. Just minutes after arriving, the worried pregnant woman was told that her husband had been shot during a robbery at the dealership. She didn't understand what was happening. She tried to contact her husband's mother, who was also working that day. It turned out that Beverly had also been shot. A total of 4 people were killed in the massacre. The third was 29-year-old Brian Lucas, and the fourth had not been identified at the time of Melissa's arrival. It was later determined that the victim was 26-year-old mechanic Chris Sherbert, who had worked at the dealership. All victims were shot in cold blood at close range, but the identity of the killer initially remained unknown. At that moment, the pregnant woman's world collapsed. She lost her beloved husband and his mother. The family business was also in jeopardy. There was no one to take care of her. Despite all the difficulties, Melissa managed to pull herself together and overcome all the problems. 7 months later, in June 2004, the widow gave birth to a boy, whom she named Scott Jr. in honor of her late husband. All this time she wanted, above all, to know who had taken her beloved father and husband, as well as her child. Law enforcement authorities continued their investigation into the sensational murder of 4 people. Due to the brutality of the crime, it was assumed that the perpetrator must have known his victims personally and had a strong motive, but there were no concrete leads pointing to a suspect. The victims' business relationships, relatives, and friends were analyzed, but a possible perpetrator could not be identified. Nothing was missing from the store. All witnesses to the crime had been killed. To make matters worse, the cameras at the shop weren't working that day. At the end of 2004, unexpected progress was finally made in this direction. Melissa was summoned to the police station. She hoped that the investigators would tell her the perpetrator's name. Instead, the young mother ended up in an interrogation room. The investigators told her that she had accidentally left one of Scott Jr.'s diapers there a few months earlier. The police compared the boy's DNA with the traces found at the crime scene. It turned out that it did not match the samples from the deceased husband. It was suspected that the woman had not had the child from her husband, but from her lover, and thus had a motive to eliminate her husband. Melissa was so stunned to have gone from victim to prime suspect that she even suggested having her husband's body exhumed. She was convinced that only he could be the child's father and that this would prove her innocence. The woman was so convincing that the police decided to double-check everything. It turned out they had indeed made a mistake. The samples from Scott and Brian, whose DNA had been collected at the shop, had been incorrectly labeled, which is why the samples didn't match. Melissa's son was indeed Scott's. Although the police admitted their mistake, the damage to the woman's reputation was enormous. The local community closely followed the events surrounding the bloody massacre at the motorcycle shop. Many readily seized on the new rumors about a possible lover of Melissa's. The rumors spread throughout the area. The woman was looked at askance and her behavior was whispered about behind her back. All of this ultimately broke Melissa's heart. She decided to return home with her child. There, however, everyone avoided her and her son. The woman didn't want this to affect the boys' relationships with the children at kindergarten and school. The year she was a suspect had caused severe damage to her reputation. Now the young mother decided that the only way to start anew was to return to her small hometown. Investigators, meanwhile, were once again at a dead end. There wasn't a single suspect for the shooting. The crime remained unsolved for more than a decade. It was assumed that the attack on the shop could have been carried out by a disgruntled employee or customer who had acted out their grudge in such an extreme way. However, none of the employees were prone to conflict. Scott had created a very pleasant working environment there. No suspected dissatisfied customers could be found. It was simply impossible to find a motive for the attacker. During this time, the man was actually doing very well. He honed his skills and built a career as one of the top real estate agents in Spartanburg, South Carolina. This continued until 2015. Then the 44-year-old agent bought a huge lot in Woodruff. It seemed as if he wanted to build a house, which was why he had bought such a large lot. After the purchase, he ordered local hunters to stay away from his land, declaring, "Your hunting days are over." He did indeed intend to radically change this place, but not quite in the way many had imagined. On December 22, 2015, 29-year-old Johnny Coxey and his 25-year-old wife, Megan Coxey, were reported missing. They were a newlywed couple who, unlike the other victims in this story, had experienced many problems. Both had suffered from substance abuse in the past. They had a child who was taken away from them by social services due to the parents' use of illegal substances. Law enforcement authorities pursued the troubled couple, but without success. Even an analysis of the missing person's cell phones yielded no results. It is likely that their means of communication were broken. The couple had virtually no relatives or close friends who might be concerned about them. Therefore, the missing persons report was filed relatively late. No one put any particular pressure on the police to search for them. No volunteers were found to form search teams for Johnny and Megan. The police had few resources, so the search progressed slowly. There were no leads, the investigation stalled, and everyone calmed down. They simply stopped looking for them. What could possibly happen to a pair of dependents? On September 4, 2016, the father of the Carver family called the police and reported his 32-year-old son, Charles Carver, missing. He had an excellent relationship with his son. They were in daily contact via phone and messenger. The relatives usually talked about their lives and sports. The last message the father received from his son was about football. The silence lasted too long. His son's complete absence worried him greatly because something like this had never happened before. The Carvers tried to clarify Charlie's fate, but it turned out that he wasn't the only one who had disappeared. His new girlfriend, Kohlhepp Brown, had also disappeared. Just 5 days after they met and first met at Walmart, both of them had disappeared. They weren't addicts. The couple had no problems. A spontaneous escape was out of the question, as it would have been pointless. The police began checking Charles and Kohlhepp's cell phone data. It turned out that a successful local real estate agent had recently contacted the woman. At the end of August, this man contacted 32-year-old Charlie and his 30-year-old girlfriend. She knew the man and had regular contact with him via social media. He had previously offered her a job with him. This time he did the same, however, there were no further leads. At first, this contact was simply dismissed, but days of searching turned into weeks. There was no information about the young people, so a more thorough investigation was launched. The efforts of the missing couple's families contributed significantly to this. Until October 2016, it seemed as if they had reached a dead end. Finally, investigators analyzed the locations of the missing couple's cell phones. It turned out that they had last been located near Todd's property, where he had invited the couple to work. The police discovered who owned the property, and everything seemed suspicious. So 2 months after the disappearance of Charlie Carver and Kala Brown, on November 3, 2016, the police found themselves on his property. One group went to Todd's house, which was located in part of his vast property. The second group quickly found a green metal container standing alone in the back, invisible from the road. Its green color blended in with the foliage, and the container was inconspicuous. As the officers listened, they realized someone was inside. It took quite a while to pick all the locks and cut the chains blocking the entrance. When the police officers entered the container, they found Kala inside, bound with chains, tortured, emaciated, but alive. Charlie was nowhere to be seen. She explained that he had been dead for a long time. According to the prisoner, he had offered her a part-time job with her boyfriend and taken her to his property. As soon as they got out of the car, he attacked her. He shot the boy 3 times in the chest. Charlie died instantly, while the attacker put Kala in chains and left her in the container, where she was held for 2 months. When Todd was informed that a prisoner had been found on his property, he acted surprised and tried to deny everything. However, this was pointless, as the victim of his torture described in detail that he was the one who had attacked her. 30-year-old Kala Brown was freed after 65 days in captivity. She said that her perpetrator raped her twice a day. He was very brutal, often tortured her, and treated her like his property. She endured it all because she was afraid to fight back and simply hoped that someone would search for her and find her soon, which is what happened. Kala was certain that if she had fought back, she would have been killed like her boyfriend. While examining the area around the container, the police discovered 3 shallow graves. Charlie's body was in one and bodies were in the other 2. All were clothed. Kala knew nothing of any other victims. Only an analysis of the dental records revealed that they were Megan and Johnny Coxey, who had disappeared a year earlier. No motive for the kidnappings and torture could be found. There was no connection between the victims. They didn't even know each other. Only the perpetrator himself could solve this mystery. The 45-year-old was arrested and imprisoned. During the initial interrogation, investigators attempted to obtain details of the crimes and a confession. It turned out that the rapist and murderer was indeed willing to cooperate with the authorities. But instead of talking about the bodies and the living woman on his property, he reported something else. With undisguised pride, the murderer began to recount the shooting 13 years earlier. Todd Kohlhepp confessed that he loved motorcycles and often drove to the motorcycle shop where Scott worked with his family. The owner of the shop had even begun to form friendly conversations with him, having become accustomed to his visits. Todd bought a motorcycle there which he later disliked, so he spent a long time looking for other models. Then Todd decided to return his motorcycle, which he no longer liked. However, Scott refused to take it back and even mocked him, which greatly angered the murderer. He didn't show his anger, but his malice grew. At some point, Todd decided to go to the dealership to take revenge. On November 6, 2003, he entered the shop as usual, strolled among the motorcycles, and waited until there were no other customers. Then he pulled out a pistol and began shooting the employees in cold blood. The last ones to be killed were Brian and Scott. They were still able to react and tried to escape, but the perpetrator's bullets hit them right in front of the entrance door. Because the killer got away with it, he began to feel untouchable, which only made the situation worse. He was unstoppable, he was bloodthirsty. New crimes on his part were only a matter of time. When he recounted the shooting at the motorcycle shop, he clearly showed no remorse for what had happened. On the contrary, he seemed proud of himself. Like many serial criminals, he wanted to impress others. For him, murder was a means of gaining recognition. After all these revelations, investigators contacted Melissa, Scott's widow. She was shocked that after 13 years, it had finally become clear what had happened at the shop and who was behind the shooting. What shocked her most was the authorities' impotence. The investigators had even tried to frame them but could do nothing until blood was shed again. If the police hadn't gone to Todd's property to search for Charlie and his girlfriend, the case might never have been solved. During interrogations, the self-important criminal was unstoppable. He delighted in recounting details of other crimes, including the murder of the newlywed couple. The last place Megan and Johnny were seen alive was Todd's property. He had also offered them work on his property. Naturally, the couple, who were struggling financially, gladly accepted the offer. The killer didn't kill them immediately, but first lulled them into a false sense of security by offering them easy work for good money. The man simply took advantage of the situation to get them to do as much work as possible on the property. But after their first meeting with him, both people were doomed to die. At first, he observed them closely and quickly realized that they were the ideal pair of victims no one would be looking for. As it turned out, on December 19, 2015, the real estate agent, who had already gained their trust, suggested that the newlyweds return to his property to clear some debris. He picked them up himself and drove them to a secluded part of his property. As soon as they both got out of the car, he shot Johnny first. The young man died instantly, and his wife was paralyzed, waiting in confusion for her fate. However, the man didn't want to kill her immediately, like Kala. There was a large metal container here that served as a mobile storage unit. Now it became a torture chamber for Megan. She spent about a week there, trying to escape several times and even setting fire to the house. He confessed that she behaved like a caged animal, was causing too many problems, so he decided to get rid of her. He cold-bloodedly shot her in the back of the head. Unlike her, Kala was obedient. That's exactly what saved her life. Johnny's grave was already located next to the container that served as a makeshift prison. He dug another hole in which he buried Megan. After that, he returned to his job as a real estate agent and acted as if nothing had happened. In reality, he was looking for a new victim to torture. According to Todd Kohlhepp's confessions, his list of crimes amounted to at least 7 murders and the kidnapping of a woman. Of course, the investigation and trial for all of these incidents would have taken an enormous amount of time and resources, which is why Todd Kohlhepp was offered life imprisonment instead of the maximum sentence if he would officially confess to all the crimes. He accepted the offer. On May 26, 2017, the serial killer was sentenced to 7 life sentences, one for each victim killed. Added to this was an additional 60 years for the kidnapping of Kala Brown. In July 2019, the victims of Todd Kohlhepp's crimes attended a hearing in a wrongful death civil lawsuit. Their goal was to obtain compensation from the company owned by the killer. The woman he had tortured for more than 2 months described in detail what she had experienced in that ill-fated container, the constant violence and the pain she had endured. As Kala recounted her torment, the defendant watched her intently and listened without showing anything. Kala never took her eyes off him. It was a true revelation. After she told her story, Todd's lawyer asked how much she wanted in compensation, but the torture victim couldn't name a specific amount. Kala hadn't even considered it. She said she didn't care. The main goal was to see the perpetrator, to look him in the eye and thus overcome herself and her fears. Kala knew that no amount of money could bring back the dead boy and the 2 months of freedom she had lost through torture. Then the hearings, initiated by Scott Ponder's family, took place. His widow, Melissa, also described in detail what she had gone through with her husband's death, what it was like raising a son without a father. The most powerful moment in the trial was when the 13-year-old boy bravely walked past the killer, looked him straight in the eye, and told him he forgave him. Melissa was proud of Scott Jr. She was convinced that had he been alive, his father would undoubtedly have appreciated this act. The boy showed a strength and maturity unusual for his age. In August 2020, Todd's assets were confiscated and the proceeds were distributed to the victims' families. But the serial killer's story didn't end there. Since then, he has repeatedly claimed there were more victims. He mentioned at least 2 more murders, but has so far avoided details. The identities of the other victims and their bodies have not been found. The investigation against him is ongoing. Police believe he may have used his work as a real estate agent to get close to people, break into their homes, and commit crimes. However, there is no evidence to support these allegations. All acquaintances described Todd in different ways. A client who had sold a house remembered him as an extremely sociable person and a professional in his field. He often talked about his firearms and actively flirted with her. A female employee of the real estate agent described Todd as short-tempered and aggressive, unable to control himself. Another colleague said he often watched adult films even at work. Acquaintances reported that he frequently visited a restaurant where he harassed waitresses. He had a reputation as a real womanizer. It turned out that one of his victims, Megan Coxey, had worked at that restaurant. He probably met her there. He posted frightening reviews on the marketplace. In one review of a shovel with a folding handle, for example, he advised keeping it in the car in case you ever need to bury bodies and have forgotten your regular shovel at home. In a review of a knife, he wrote, "I haven't stabbed anyone with it yet, but I hope to do so with a tool as high quality as this." In a review of a padlock, he wrote, "Reliable locks. You need 5 of these on a container to keep it safe from escaping." Such reviews sounded extremely threatening, but no one paid any attention to them at the time. For all these incidents, not only the murderer was charged, but also his friend, a suspected accomplice named Dustin Stanfield. He knew that Dustin Stanfield was a convicted felon. Nevertheless, between 2012 and 2016, he bought him at least 12 guns and 5 silencers. As it turns out, it was thanks to this man that an extensive collection of firearms was amassed, which were used in the murders. In 2018, the accomplice pleaded guilty to 36 charges related to these transactions. He was sentenced to a total of 8 years and 3 months in prison for all of these charges. Dustin Stanfield was released from prison on November 13, 2023, while Todd Kohlhepp remains behind bars and will never leave the prison walls. Thanks for watching and take care of yourselves.